All right, so in our last set of notes, we talked a great deal about immigration, and we talked about how we had immigrants from all over the world coming to the U.S. So we saw Southern and Eastern European Italians, Greeks, Turks, Hungarians, Russians, Chinese, all trying to start over. Some of them were trying to escape religious persecution. Some of them were trying to escape difficult financial situations. And again, they all typically came through Angel Island Immigration Station or Ellis Island, the federal immigration station. So in this section, we are going to switch our focus just slightly, and we're going to talk about urbanization. And urbanization is just the movement of people to the cities and also the growth of cities and how they tended to become pretty crowded pretty quickly at the turn of the 19th century. And then we're also going to talk about how, because these cities were so overpopulated, and because this is the first time really that we start to see so many people living in such small areas, that a lot of challenges arise. So most of the new immigrants moved to the nation's cities. Now, this was mostly because our factories, our major industries were within the city, and they were the ones that were hiring people. And so a lot of these immigrants know that that's where they needed to go in order to get jobs. By 1910, immigrants made up more than half of the populations of 18 different cities, and as city populations rose, overcrowding resulted. As efficient machines increase farm production, it cost farm jobs. So because they're able to do their work much more efficiently, they don't need as many farmers in order to get the job done. And so these people then are out of work and head to the city to find new jobs. About 200,000 of these urban dwellers were African Americans leaving the South for northern cities, hoping to escape racial violence, but they soon found prejudice and low wages. And we talked a little bit about this already. So this was the Great Migration, and this is when we see African Americans fleeing the South and heading northeast, midwest, and west, and they're in search of better lives. They're trying to escape their current situation in the South, escape the lynchings, escape the racial discrimination, segregation, prejudice, and low wages. And they need work, and they need good work, and they felt that if they moved from the South, they might find it. All right, the growing cities had many problems. So these are a number of the problems that we saw through the cities because of the growth of those cities. There were housing shortages. There were not enough places for people to live. We also saw converted single-family homes into family apartments. So these were typically supposed to be for small families, and they ended up becoming apartments that were crowded with, anywhere from 10 to 20 people. Crowded conditions were full of filth and disease. Things were not kept clean. There were transportation problems, lack of clean water, lack of sanitation, and so people were getting sick and diseases were spreading throughout the city. By the 1900s, most cities had fire departments, but lack of water made it very dangerous, and a reliance on wood as building materials gave fires fuel to burn. We also saw an increase of crime in the cities as well because of overpopulation. Some of the diseases that were popular during this time was cholera, and this was an intestinal infection, and it was caused by contaminated food and water. We also saw malaria, which was an infective disease that spread through mosquito bites. We saw diphtheria, and some other diseases as well. And again, these really thrived in those crowded apartment buildings, also known as tenement buildings. Children were especially in danger of these diseases. In one district of tenements in New York City, 6 out of 10 babies died before their first birthday, which is just devastating. There was also the heat wave, and that took lives of 400 people from August 5th to the 13th in 1896. And in Chicago and New York City, they established fresh air havens on their waterfronts for sick children to escape the deadly conditions of the slums. So there was one positive. Urban problems. Now remember, in case you didn't already realize, urban means city and rural means farmland or further out from the city. So urban problems, city problems, housing. There were 3 options for housing for people living in the city. One, they could live outside of town and face transportation issues, rent a cramped room in a boarding house, or occupy a tenement or a single-family house with 2 or more families. And again, it would get extremely crowded. There were not very many places for people to sleep. Typically, these tenement buildings only had 1 bed, and so you would actually take turns or take shifts sleeping in the bed, and then others would sleep on the floor, and it again got very dirty very quickly. So again, tenements were low-cost apartment buildings designed to house as many families as the owner could pack in. A group of dirty, run-down tenements could transform an area into a slum. So where we see an area within the city where there are many tenements, this would also be known as a slum. Before long, cities began to decline. Trees and grass disappeared. People were crammed into small spaces and disease were spreading. Pollution from steam engines and boilers spread. And open sewers attracted rats and other diseases, and they were, again, spreading these diseases as well. So here are some pictures of the tenement living, and as you can see, extremely cramped. Several people are sleeping on the floor here, and again, 1 bed. Here again, you can see all of the people that are in just such a tight area. It's very crowded. During this time, there was no process in which garbage would be collected. And so typically what you did, honestly, is you just threw it out on the street. And so, again, not clean, and disease is going to be able to spread very easily in the cities because of this. I mean, look how cramped this is. Here's a family eating around a table. You're doing laundry in your home because there is no space to do it elsewhere. Here you go again. You can see how dirty the floor is. And it was dangerous as well. A lot of these tenement buildings had a lot of issues. There were pieces missing from the floor. Molding was torn off. Doors were broken. And children, as young as you see in this image and younger, were playing in this area. And they were constantly getting hurt. I mean, this was their playground. There was no other place for them to go. And so it was extremely dangerous for young ones. Okay, urban problems, transportation. So mass transit, such as streetcars or subway, helped ease travel problems. Eventually, it allowed large numbers of people to move to and from the city. Most homes did not have indoor water. Most water was full of bacteria and diseases. And the invention of chlorine helped kill most bacteria. Major cities built reservoirs or waterworks to collect clean water far from the city and filter out impurities. So some improvements. In 1901, the New York City law required that hallway bathrooms replace backyard outhouses. Landlords installed small bathtubs and sinks with running water in most apartments. So things got better. Sanitation. Most streets were full of horse manure. Sewage flowed into the streets, and most homes only had an outhouse. People dumped their trash in the streets, and cities finally put in sewage lines and created sanitation departments to provide hygienic living conditions. As population increased, so did crime. Thieves had no price to pay. Until 1844, there was no police force in the U.S. Fire. With limited water and wood construction, building fire could easily happen. Many used candles for lighting and kerosene heaters. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871, this took 18,000 buildings down, burned them to the ground. 250 people were killed and 100,000 were left homeless. Property damages were around $200 million. And up until 1853, no city had a paid fire department. So again, fire was a constant danger in the cities. With the tenements packed so close together, a small fire could spread very quickly, leaping from roof to roof. As a result, most large cities had fires during this time period. Unfortunately, Chicago experienced one of the most devastating yet again. The Chicago Fire of 1871. Unfortunately, we still don't know today what actually started it. But before it was over, again, 18,000 buildings had been burned, leaving many killed and homeless. And property damages, again, were $200 million, which is converted to $2 billion today. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Great Chicago Fire and watch a video on it as well a little later on. Because of some of these major issues, the social gospel movement pushed to improve life in the cities. It held that Christians had a duty to try to reform conditions. Settlement houses were created. Settlement houses were community centers aimed at helping the poor, especially immigrants, run mostly by women. They offered schooling, nursing, and other assistance. Jane Addams and Ellen Gates Starr turned Hull House into a center of community activity, anticipating and responding to the needs of the community as a whole. And we'll talk a lot more about Jane Addams and the great social work that she provided. So the social gospel movement, it sought to apply the gospel teachings of Jesus directly to society. The movement focused on gospel ideas of charity, justice, especially by seeking labor reforms. Other things that settlement houses offered, again, social services. It started in Britain and believed that just giving money to the poor never really helped them. And these people just wanted to help the poor, often lived among them so that they could relate to their experience and get a better understanding of their needs. And Jane Addams is one of the persons that actually did that. The Hull House, this was actually originally Charles Hull Manson in Chicago. Originally, his home. So if you attended the Hull House, you could do a number of things. You could take classes, you could display exhibits of crafts from your home countries, child care centers were offered, there were playgrounds, clubs, summer camps, offices to help people find jobs and deal with legal problems, healthcare clinics, and it also launched investigations of city, economic, political, and social conditions, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those investigations when we get to the Gilded Age, which is next. These actions laid the foundations for many reforms, and again, we'll talk more about those during the Gilded Age. So as you can see, there were a lot of problems in the cities at the turn of the 19th century and through the 1900s. However, things got better, and if we hadn't had these problems to begin with, then we wouldn't have been able to fix them. And so it brought light to a lot of issues, but it also led to reforms and safer living conditions for all.